Months after being battered by the pandemic, China has now faced another massive issue, and that is torrential rains. China is now battling some of the worst floods in decades. Vast swaths of China have been inundated along the Yangtze River, destroying homes and impacting the livelihoods of millions of people. Heavy rains since June have left at least 141 people dead and missing. The floods have forced nearly 15 million people to be evacuated from their homes. It has also caused billions of dollars in economic losses. Thousands of troops have been deployed across the country to help shore up defenses. Waters in more than 400 rivers have exceeded warning levels, while some have reached historic highs over the period. This comes after reports of the highest average rainfall levels across the Yangtze Basin since 1961. Even though major cities have more or less been spared, the city of Wuhan remains on high alert. Wuhan, which was the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic in China, sits on the banks of the Yangtze River. Meanwhile, authorities in central China have blasted a dam to release surging waters amid heavy flooding. According to Chinese state broadcasters, the dam on the Chu River, a tributary of the Yangtze River, was destroyed with explosives. But this sort of flood response is not new in China. Blasting dams was an exercise and an extreme response used during China's worst floods in 1998. While China typically experiences flooding every summer, floods this year in parts of the country have been described as the worst floods in 30 years. However, critics say that the summer flooding threat has worsened over the decades due to rampant overdevelopment and poor policies such as overbuilding of dams. The floods are now expected to disrupt global supply chains of essential medical supplies needed during this global health crisis. It could also derail the strong bounce back that the Chinese economy has experienced since the pandemic. Joining us on this broadcast is WION correspondent Patrick Falk, who joins us from Beijing. Patrick, the situation is really bad across China, isn't it? Several regions have declared a red alert. More than 100 are dead or missing. Can you give us the latest updates, please?
Yeah, that's right. It's a really serious situation. And just to give you some perspective, 443 of China's rivers nationwide have been flooded, including 33 at record levels. They are swelling to record levels. So it is, as I say, a serious situation. It's been described as perilous. You mentioned earlier that heavy rains are not unusual around this time of the year, but it has been particularly bad this year. A couple of million people have been displaced already. Around 150 are dead, according to official figures, and people are saying that this is the worst they've seen in decades. Just to give you an idea, in 1998, the last time China experienced these sorts of water levels and this sort of flooding, around 3,000 people died then. So there is potential for things to get worse, certainly, and they are expecting a water crest to be filled again tomorrow. So there's more water on the way, as far as we understand. Interestingly, that point you made about the dam blasting in Anhui province, that's a technique that they used back in 1998 to try and control the swelling. So the idea is that the water gets channeled into pools and low-lying areas, and that stops the water kind of shifting uncontrollably if the swelling does get out of control. But certainly one would hope that authorities are doing everything they can to manage the situation. As far as we understand, military personnel and other authorities are trying to make sure that embankments are being reinforced with rocks and sandbags and so forth. But it does seem as though the worst is yet to come.
Right, Patrick, were there also, there were also reports of some concerns over the Three Gorges dam in China. Could you give us more details on that? But, these floods in China, the impact of these floods in China this year especially will be felt not just in China but several other nations because because of the supply chains which have been disrupted, especially given that the world is battling the COVID-19 pandemic. China does produce a lot of equipment, especially the personal protective equipment, and supply chains will be impacted as well.
Well, on your first point, we are being told that the Three Gorges Dam is close to capacity. Its capacity is 175 metres, and supposedly we are getting pretty close to that stage. The amount of water that was rushing in on Saturday was something like 60,000 cubic metres per second. I can't really give you a perspective of what that means exactly, but, the situation is serious. On the second point you talk about, with medical supplies, of course, this is going to hamper not just production, but of course, transportation of things like PPE and so on and so forth. And of course, this is another serious situation that China is dealing with on top of the coronavirus pandemic. The country is coming out of the worst of that, and it's facing this other crisis on the way. Interestingly, some of the worst hit areas were also some of the badly affected periods over the past few months during the COVID-19 pandemic. So Hubei province in particular has been really quite badly hit. And this is going to impact China's recovery overall. Economically, there are lots of figures being bandied about. Xinhua news agency has suggested that the flood...